The afternoon sun felt warm against the windshield as Daniela drove down Maple Street, her favorite radio station playing softly in the background. In the back seat, her 8-year-old son Tyler was showing his little sister the new song he learned on piano, his fingers dancing in the air like he was still at the keys. 6-year-old Amara giggled, trying to copy his movements. It was just another Thursday, the kind of peaceful moment that makes you forget the world can be complicated. Daniela smiled at them through the rearview mirror. These were the moments she lived for. After a long shift at the hospital where she worked as a pediatric nurse, picking up her kids from their piano lessons and hearing about their day was her favorite part. Tyler was telling her about how his teacher said he was getting really good at Beethoven when she noticed the flashing lights behind her. Her heart did that little jump it always does when you see police lights, even when you know you haven't done anything wrong. She checked her speedometer. She was going 30 in a 35 zone. Her license and registration were current. Her seatbelt was on. The kids were buckled in their car seats properly. She couldn't think of a single reason why she was being pulled over. Daniela put on her turn signal and carefully pulled to the side of the road, making sure she was completely off the pavement. She rolled down her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. Her husband had taught her that. Always keep your hands visible. Always be polite. Always stay calm. She took a deep breath and waited. 2 officers got out of the patrol car. The first one, a tall man with a serious face, walked up to her window while his partner stayed back near the police car. Daniela noticed neighbors starting to peek out from their yards. Mrs. Chen from across the street was watering her garden but had stopped to watch. License and registration, the officer said. No greeting. No explanation. Just a command. Of course, officer, Daniela said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Can you tell me what I did wrong? Just give me your license and registration, ma'am. Daniela slowly reached for her purse, announcing each movement. I'm reaching for my purse now. My wallet is inside. She'd seen too many news stories to take any chances. Her hands were shaking slightly as she pulled out her license and reached across to the glove compartment for her registration. The officer took the documents without a word and walked back to his car. Daniela sat there, confused and increasingly worried. In the back seat, Tyler had stopped his piano fingers. He was watching everything with wide eyes. Mommy, why did the police stop us? Amara asked, her small voice uncertain. I don't know, sweetie. I'm sure it's just a mistake. Everything's going to be fine, but everything wasn't fine. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Daniela could see the officer in his car, talking on his radio, looking at her license, then looking at her car. What was taking so long? She'd been pulled over once before for a broken taillight, and that had taken maybe 3 minutes total. Finally, both officers walked back to her car. The first officer handed back her license but kept the registration. His partner positioned himself on the passenger side, looking into the back where her children sat. Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Daniela's stomach dropped. I'm sorry, what? Why, what did I do? Step out of the vehicle, please. But my children are in the car. Can you please just tell me what this is about? The officer's voice got harder. Ma'am, you fit the description of a suspect involved in a robbery earlier today. I need you to step out of the vehicle now. Daniela's mind went blank for a second. A robbery? Her? She looked down at her scrubs, still wearing her hospital ID badge around her neck. She'd come straight from work to pick up the kids. Officer, there must be some mistake. I'm a nurse at Children's National Hospital. I just got off my shift an hour ago. I've been at work all day. Ma'am, step out of the vehicle now. The way he said it made it clear this wasn't a request anymore. Daniela looked back at her children. Tyler's face had gone pale. Amara was starting to cry. Can I please just comfort my children first? They're scared. Step out of the vehicle. Daniela unbuckled her seatbelt with shaking hands. It's okay, babies. Mommy will be right here. Everything's okay. But her voice cracked on the last word because she wasn't sure if everything was okay. She stepped out of the car, and before she could even close the door, the officer grabbed her arm and spun her around to face the car. Put your hands on the vehicle. Officer, please, my kids are watching. Can we just talk about this? Hands on the vehicle. Daniela put her hands on the hot metal hood of her car. The sun had been beating down on it all day and the heat burned her palms. Behind her, she could hear Amara crying louder now. Tyler was trying to unbuckle his car seat. Tyler, stay in your seat, baby, she called out. trying to keep her voice calm even though tears were starting to stream down her own face. She felt the cold metal of handcuffs close around her wrists. The click of each one felt like a door slamming shut. She was being handcuffed. In front of her children. In front of her neighbors. On her own street 3 blocks from her house. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice shaking now. "Please, I haven't done anything wrong. Check my badge. Call the hospital. I've been at work all day." The officer didn't respond. He walked her to the back of her car, and she had to stand there, handcuffed, while his partner started going through her vehicle. Her purse was pulled out and everything dumped onto the street. Her wallet, her lipstick, tissues, the grocery list she'd written that morning, Tyler's toy car that he'd left in her bag, all scattered on the asphalt. More neighbors were coming out now. Mr. Rodriguez from next door. The couple from the corner house she always waved to, but whose names she'd never learned. All of them watching. All of them seeing her standing there in handcuffs like a criminal. Inside the car, both children were crying now. Amara was screaming for her. Tyler was banging on the window. Daniela wanted to run to them, to hold them, to tell them it was all a terrible mistake, but she couldn't move. She could only stand there and watch as these officers tore through her life looking for evidence of a crime she didn't commit. "Please," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, my children need me." But no one was listening. The warm afternoon that had started with piano music and laughter had turned into a nightmare that Daniela would never forget. And in a hotel room 2,000 miles away, her husband's phone buzzed with a missed call, not knowing that at that very moment, his wife needed him more than she ever had before. The metal handcuffs dug into Daniela's wrists as she stood there, watching the second officer pull out Tyler's backpack from the car. He unzipped it and dumped everything onto the ground. Homework papers fluttered in the breeze. Pencils rolled across the pavement. Tyler's favorite superhero lunchbox landed with a thud, and she watched helplessly as the officer opened it and looked inside at the half-eaten sandwich from lunch. "What are you looking for?" Daniela asked, her voice stronger now despite the tears on her cheeks. "I told you I'm a nurse. I just picked my kids up from piano lessons." "Check my phone." "Check my work schedule. Call my supervisor." The first officer, whose name tag read Kendricks, glanced at her with cold eyes. "Ma'am, you need to stay quiet while we conduct our search. But you haven't told me what you're searching for." "You said I fit a description." "What description? What am I supposed to have done?" Officer Kendricks ignored her completely and moved to search the front seat. He pulled out the kids' piano books, flipped through them like there might be something hidden inside. He checked under the seats in the cup holders everywhere. His partner was now going through Amara's little pink backpack, and Daniela felt a fresh wave of anger mixing with her fear. From the back seat, Tyler had stopped crying. His face was pressed against the window and his eyes were fixed on his mother. He looked terrified and confused, and Daniela knew that look would haunt her forever. Amara was still sobbing, her little hands reaching toward the door. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who lived 2 doors down and who'd brought them cookies last Christmas, walked up to the scene. She was a retired teacher, the kind of person who wasn't afraid to speak her mind. "Officer, excuse me," she said, her voice firm. "I've known this family for 3 years. Daniela is a wonderful mother and a nurse at the hospital. There must be some kind of mistake here." Officer Kendricks turned to her. "Ma'am, you need to step back. I'm just saying you've got the wrong person. She's one of the most honest people I've ever met. Ma'am, step back now or you'll be arrested for interfering with police business." Mrs. Patterson's face went red, but she stepped back. Daniela saw her pull out her phone and start recording. Other neighbors were doing the same thing now. At least 5 people had their phones up, capturing everything. The search continued for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. Every personal item Daniela owned was laid out on the street for everyone to see. Her work bag with her stethoscope and medical supplies, the grocery bags from her shopping trip yesterday. Even the kids' car seats were pulled out and examined. Officer Kendricks picked up her nurse's badge that had fallen from her purse. "You see my badge," Daniela said. "That's me, Daniela Brooks, pediatric nurse. I work with sick children. Does that sound like someone who robs people?" The officer pulled out a small notepad and started writing something down. His partner walked over, and they spoke in low voices that Daniela couldn't quite hear. She caught fragments. Not matching the age, and different vehicle, and check again. Her heart started to beat faster. They were realizing their mistake. She could see it in the way they looked at each other, in the way the partner shifted his weight uncomfortably. Finally, Officer Kendricks walked back to her. He didn't meet her eyes. "We're going to remove the handcuffs now." "So you're admitting you made a mistake?" "The suspect we're looking for drives a similar vehicle." "A similar vehicle? That's it? You handcuffed me in front of my children, humiliated me in front of my neighbors, went through all my personal belongings because I drive a similar car." The handcuffs came off, and Daniela rubbed her wrists where they'd left red marks. Her hands were shaking with anger now instead of fear. "What about an apology?" she demanded. "What about explaining to my traumatized children why their mother was treated like a criminal? What about all of this?" She gestured to her belongings scattered across the street. Officer Kendricks handed her back her registration. "You're free to go." "Free to go? That's all you have to say?" "No, sorry. No, we made a terrible mistake. We were following protocol, ma'am." "Protocol? Your protocol is to handcuff innocent people, without any real evidence, without even asking questions first?" The officer's jaw tightened. "Like I said, you're free to go. I suggest you gather your belongings and move along." Daniela stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. Move along. Like she was the problem. Like she was the one causing a scene. Not the two officers, who had just terrorized her and her children, based on nothing more than driving a common type of car. The officers got back in their patrol car. No apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd just put her through. They just drove away, leaving Daniela standing in the street surrounded by her scattered belongings and her crying children. The moment the police car disappeared around the corner, Daniela's legs almost gave out. She grabbed the side of her car to steady herself. Her whole body was shaking now. Mrs. Patterson rushed over immediately, putting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay, dear? Do you need me to call someone?" Daniela shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again. She didn't know what she needed. She needed to get to her children. That was all she could think about. She opened the back door, and both Tyler and Amara threw themselves at her, crying and holding on tight. Daniela held them, her own tears flowing freely now. She didn't try to stop them. She just held her babies and let them cry it out. "It's okay," she whispered, kissing the top of their heads. "Mommy's okay. Everything's okay now." But Tyler pulled back and looked at her with eyes that seemed too old for an 8-year-old. "Why did they do that to you, Mom? You didn't do anything wrong." How do you explain that to a child? How do you explain that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you can hurt you instead? That sometimes the color of your skin matters, more than the content of your character? Daniela didn't have good answers. She wasn't sure any existed. "I don't know, baby. Sometimes people make mistakes. But they didn't even say sorry." "I know." Mr. Rodriguez and 2 other neighbors helped her gather her belongings from the street. Someone had picked up all of Tyler's homework and put it back in his backpack. Someone else had collected her makeup and personal items. They all had the same look on their faces, a mixture of sympathy, anger, and something else. Maybe guilt that they'd witnessed it but couldn't stop it. "I got the whole thing on video, Mr. Rodriguez said quietly. "If you need it." Daniela nodded. "Thank you. I might." She somehow managed to load the kids back in their car seats, though her hands were still trembling. She somehow managed to drive the 3 blocks home, though she didn't really remember doing it. She pulled into her driveway and just sat there for a moment staring at her house, her safe place, her home. But she didn't feel safe anymore. Inside, she tried to call her husband. It went straight to voicemail. That wasn't unusual. His work often took him to places where phones didn't work properly, but right now she needed him more than she ever had. She left a message, trying to keep her voice steady. "Honey, it's me. Something happened. I'm okay. The kids are okay. But I really need you to call me as soon as you can. It's important. I love you." She hung up and looked at her children sitting on the couch, still sniffling. Tyler had his arm around his little sister protectively. They looked at her like she had the answers, like she could fix this. But Daniela didn't feel like she could fix anything right now. What she did know was that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Those officers had made a terrible mistake and they'd walked away like it was nothing, like her dignity meant nothing, like her children's trauma meant nothing. Daniela pulled out her laptop and started typing. She was going to file a complaint. She was going to make sure people knew what happened. She was going to fight back the only way she knew how. Because if she didn't, if she just let this go, then what message was she sending to Tyler and Amara? That it was okay to be treated this way? That they should just accept it? No, she refused to accept that. And when her husband finally got her message and came home, she knew he wouldn't accept it either. The question was, what could they really do about it? They were just regular people against an entire police department. What chance did they have? She was about to find out that sometimes being regular people wasn't quite as simple as it seemed. That night, Daniela barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those flashing lights. She felt the handcuffs. She heard Amara screaming for her. At 3 a.m, she gave up trying and went downstairs to make coffee. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, silent. Still no call back from her husband. She knew he was somewhere he couldn't easily communicate. It happened sometimes with his job. But right now, sitting alone in her dark kitchen with the weight of the day pressing down on her, she'd never felt more alone. She picked up her phone and started scrolling through social media, and that's when she saw it. The video. Mr. Rodriguez had posted it with a simple caption. "This happened in our neighborhood today. An innocent nurse handcuffed in front of her children. We can do better." Daniela watched herself on the screen, watched the whole terrible scene play out again. The comments were already starting to pile up. Most were supportive, angry on her behalf, but some made her stomach turn. She must have done something. We don't know the whole story. Why didn't she just comply? She set the phone down, her hands shaking again. She had complied. She'd done everything right. And it hadn't mattered. By morning, Tyler wouldn't eat breakfast. He just pushed his cereal around in the bowl, staring at it. Amara wouldn't let Daniela out of her sight, following her from room to room like a shadow. When Daniela suggested they get ready for school, Tyler looked up at her with red eyes. "I don't want to go." "Sweetie, you have to go to school." "What if the police come again? What if they take you away and don't bring you back?" Daniela's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. She knelt down in front of her son and took his hands. "That's not going to happen. What happened yesterday was wrong, and Mommy's going to make sure it doesn't happen again." "How?" "Good question. How does a regular person fight against something so big?" But she couldn't let her children see her doubt. She couldn't let them grow up afraid. "I'm going to tell people what happened. I'm going to make sure the right people know that this isn't okay." After she finally convinced the kids to go to school, promising the teachers would keep them safe, Daniela drove to the police station. Her heart was pounding the whole way there. Part of her was terrified to walk into that building. But she'd made a promise to her children, and she was going to keep it. The station was busy with people coming and going. Daniela stood in line at the front desk for 15 minutes before a sergeant finally called her forward. He was an older man with gray hair and a bored expression. "How can I help you?" "I need to file a complaint. I was pulled over yesterday by 2 of your officers, and I was treated very poorly. I was handcuffed in front of my children even though I hadn't done anything wrong." The sergeant pulled out a form. "Names of the officers?" Kendricks was one. "I didn't catch the other one's name." He started writing, asking her questions in a monotone voice. Time of incident, location, description of what happened. He didn't look up at her once. When she finished explaining everything, including how the officers never apologized, he slid the form into a folder. "We'll review the complaint and get back to you." "When?" "These things take time, ma'am." "How much time?" "Could be a few weeks. Could be longer. We have procedures to follow." Daniela felt her frustration building. "Your officers handcuffed me for no reason. They traumatized my children. They humiliated me in front of my entire neighborhood. And you're telling me it could Be weeks before anyone even looks at this? The sergeant finally looked up at her, his expression unchanged. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but officers were following protocol for a suspect search. You should be grateful it was just a misunderstanding and not something more serious. Grateful. That word hit her like a slap. She should be grateful that she was only humiliated and traumatized. Grateful that her children only had to watch their mother be treated like a criminal. Grateful that she still had her dignity, even though these officers had done their best to strip it away. Thank you for your time, Daniela said through gritted teeth, and walked out before she said something she'd regret. In her car, she sat for a long moment before calling her best friend Nicole. They'd been friends since nursing school, and Nicole always knew what to do. When she answered, Daniela couldn't hold it together anymore. The whole story poured out between sobs. Girl, no, Nicole said, her voice fierce. No. You need to do more than just file a complaint with them. They're just going to protect their own. You need to post this online. You need to call the news. You need to make noise. I don't know if I can handle that. It's already online, and some of the comments... Forget the comments. Most people will support you. And the ones who don't, they're part of the problem. Daniela, if you don't speak up, this will happen to someone else. Maybe someone who doesn't have a husband who can support them. Maybe someone who doesn't have neighbors who filmed it. You have proof. You have witnesses. Use it. After they hung up, Daniela sat in the parking lot thinking about Nicole's words. She pulled up the video again and watched it one more time. Really watched it. And she saw what everyone else would see. A woman in scrubs clearly coming from work, being treated like a dangerous criminal. 2 little children crying for their mother. Officers who showed no compassion, no common sense, no humanity. Nicole was right. She had to speak up. Daniela went home and wrote out exactly what happened. Every detail. She posted it on every social media platform she had. She shared Mr. Rodriguez's video. She wrote about how her children were affected. She ended with a simple question. Is this the kind of policing we want in our community? Then she started calling local news stations. The first 2 weren't interested. We get a lot of these stories, one producer told her. But the 3rd station asked her to come in for an interview. By that evening, the story was starting to spread. Not just in her neighborhood, but across the city. People were sharing the video, adding their own stories of similar experiences. The hashtag someone created was trending locally. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages of support, interview requests, and a few nasty comments that she tried to ignore. That night, her husband finally called. She'd never been so relieved to hear his voice. Danny, I just got your message. What happened? Are you okay? And she told him everything. She'd thought she was done crying, but hearing his voice made it all fresh again. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end. I'm coming home, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. You can't just leave. I know your work is important. Nothing is more important than you and our kids. I'm coming home, and Danny? Those officers have no idea who they messed with. There was something in his voice that she'd heard before. The voice he used when he was planning a mission. The voice of someone who got things done. What are you going to do? Whatever it takes to make this right. I have some calls to make. Sit tight, baby. I'll be home as soon as I can. After they hung up, Daniela felt a shift inside her. She wasn't alone in this fight. And while she didn't know exactly what her husband was planning, she knew one thing for certain. He had connections she didn't even fully understand. His work was classified, but she knew he commanded respect from people in very high places. The next morning, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, a professional voice introduced himself as a civil rights attorney who'd seen her story. He wanted to help. Pro bono. Mrs. Brooks, what happened to you is a clear violation of your civil rights, and I think we can do more than just file a complaint. I think we can create real change. Daniela thought about Tyler's question. How are you going to make sure it doesn't happen again? Maybe this was how. Maybe one person speaking up, refusing to be silent, could actually make a difference. Tell me what I need to do, she said. The attorney started explaining the process, but Daniela was only half listening. She was thinking about her husband coming home, about the attorney offering to help, about the community rallying around her, about how something that started as the worst day of her life might actually turn into something bigger. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to find out just how big this could get. Because her husband wasn't just any soldier making calls to a few friends. He was making calls to generals, to congressmen, to people who could move mountains with a single conversation. The police department thought this would blow over like it always did. A complaint filed, a few angry social media posts, then silence. They had no idea what was coming. When Colonel Raymond Brooks walked through his front door 48 hours after Daniela's call, his children ran to him like they always did. But this time was different. Amara wrapped herself around his leg and wouldn't let go. Tyler hugged him tight and then burst into tears. Raymond looked over their heads at his wife, and the pain in her eyes told him everything he needed to know about how bad this really was. That night, after the kids finally fell asleep, Raymond sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. Daniela sat across from him watching him work. He'd barely said 10 words since the kids went to bed. He just kept watching the video over and over. His jaw got tighter each time. "Tell me again exactly what the sergeant said when you filed the complaint," he said quietly. Daniela repeated the conversation, including the part about being grateful. Raymond's eyes darkened. "Grateful," he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "They want you to be grateful." He closed the laptop and looked at his wife. "I need you to know something. What I'm about to do, it's not about me being in the military. It's not about my rank or my position, but I'm going to use every resource I have to make sure this never happens to another family. Is that okay with you? What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make some calls. And then we're going to get justice, not just for you but for everyone this has happened to." The next morning, Raymond started making those calls. The first was to General Patricia Hawthorne. They'd served together in 3 different operations, and she'd once told him if he ever needed anything at all, he just had to ask. "Ray," she answered on the second ring. "Good to hear from you. How's that beautiful family of yours?" "Not good, General. That's why I'm calling." He told her what happened, keeping his voice steady and professional. When he finished, there was silence on the other end. Then the general spoke, and her voice had steel in it. "Send me everything. The video, the police report, all of it. I'm having lunch with Governor Chen next week, and I think this might come up in conversation." The second call was to his friend Lawrence Martin, a civil rights attorney who'd successfully sued 4 different police departments. Lawrence had been asking Raymond for years to go into consulting with him after retirement. Now Raymond was calling in that favor. "I already reached out to your wife," Lawrence said. "The video hit my desk 2 days ago. Ray, this is bad, but it's also exactly the kind of case that can change things. Are you both prepared for what this means? This could get ugly. The media attention, the pushback, the threats." "We are prepared," Raymond said, though he wasn't sure that was entirely true. "What do we need to do?" "First, we file a federal civil rights lawsuit. Not against the officers individually, though we'll include them. Against the entire department. We need to show a pattern of behavior. And Ray, between you and me, I've already found 5 other cases involving Officer Kendricks. 5. All people of color, all dismissed or settled quietly." Raymond felt his anger building, but he kept it controlled. Anger was useless unless you could channel it into action. "What else? We make noise. Lots of it. I know you military guys like to keep things quiet, but this needs to be loud. Press conferences, interviews. We need to show that this isn't just about one bad stop. It's about systemic problems." The third call was to Congressman David Torres. Raymond had helped rescue the congressman's son from a hostage situation overseas 3 years ago. The congressman had told him the same thing the general had. "Anything you need, Colonel Brooks," Torres answered warmly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" After Raymond explained, the congressman's tone changed completely. "I'm calling for a hearing. This happened in my district and I want answers. Give me 48 hours. Within those 48 hours, everything changed. The story that had been spreading locally suddenly went national. A major news network picked it up with the headline, "Nurse handcuffed in front of children during wrong suspect stop." But then someone leaked that the nurse's husband was a high-ranking Delta Force commander, and the story exploded. Daniela's phone rang constantly. Interview requests from every major network. Messages from advocacy groups. Even celebrities were sharing the video now. The hashtag had gone from local trending to national. But Raymond was careful about how they handled the attention. When they did their first television interview, he wore civilian clothes, not his uniform. He sat next to Daniela, holding her hand, and let her tell most of the story. "I want to be clear about something," Raymond said when the reporter asked about his military position. "My wife deserves to be treated with dignity and respect because she's a human being, not because of who her husband is. Every person in this country deserves that same respect from law enforcement. Whether they're married to a colonel or working 3 jobs to make ends meet. This isn't about me. It's about a broken system that needs fixing. The clip went viral. People shared it with comments like, "Finally, someone with power speaking truth," and "This is what real leadership looks like." But not everyone was supportive. The police union released a statement defending the officers. Officers Kendricks and Davies followed proper protocol in what they believed was a legitimate suspect stop. Any suggestion of racial profiling is unfounded and offensive to the hardworking men and women who risk their lives every day. That statement only made people angrier. Social media erupted. Protests started forming outside the police department. The mayor's office released a statement promising an investigation, but it felt hollow. Everyone knew what police investigations of themselves usually meant. Nothing. Then Congressman Torres made good on his promise. He called for public hearings on police conduct in the community. The police chief was summoned to testify. Officer Kendricks's record was subpoenaed. And suddenly, things the department had kept quiet for years were coming to light. Lawrence Martin held a press conference outside the federal courthouse, announcing the lawsuit. He stood there with Raymond and Daniela on one side, and 5 other families on the other. All of them had been stopped by Officer Kendricks. All of them had similar stories. A mother pulled over while taking her son to baseball practice. A father handcuffed during a traffic stop on his way to work. A grandmother searched because she fit a description. "This is not about one bad officer," Lawrence said to the cameras. "This is about a system that allows bad officers to keep operating. A system that dismisses complaints. A system that values protecting its own over protecting the community. Today we're saying enough is enough." The police chief tried to get ahead of the story by offering Daniela a settlement. A quiet one. Sign an agreement, take some money, don't talk about it publicly. The chief's lawyer called Lawrence with a number that made even the experienced attorney raise his eyebrows. Lawrence called Raymond. "They're offering $500,000. That's more than these cases usually settle for. They want this to go away." "What does Daniela want?" Raymond asked. That evening, they sat down as a family. Tyler and Amara were already in bed, but Raymond knew they needed to make this decision together. $500,000 would change our lives, Daniela said slowly. "We could pay off the house, save for the kids' college. You could retire early if you wanted, but..." Raymond knew there was a but. "But Lawrence says if we settle quietly, nothing changes. Kendricks keeps his job. The department keeps operating the same way. And the next family this happens to? They might not have video. They might not have neighbors who care. They might not have a husband who can call generals and congressmen." Raymond took her hand. "So what do you want to do?" Daniela looked at the wall where they'd hung the kids' artwork. Tyler had drawn a picture after the incident. It showed a police car with a big red X through it. Her heart broke every time she looked at it. Her son was 8 years old and already afraid of the people who were supposed to protect him. "I want to fight," she said. "Not for the money. For change. Real change." "So that picture Tyler drew? So that fear in his eyes? No other kid has to feel that way." Raymond smiled. The first real smile she'd seen since he got home. "That's my girl. Let's show them what happens when they mess with the wrong family." The next day, Lawrence Martin held another press conference. "My clients have rejected the settlement offer. We're going to trial, and we're going to expose every single thing that's been covered up in that department for years." The police union called it a mistake. The chief called it unfortunate. But in living rooms across the country, people were watching and thinking maybe, just maybe, something was about to change. And in a small office in the police department, Officer Kendricks was starting to realize that this wasn't going away. For the first time in his career, there were going to be consequences. The question was, how far would those consequences reach? That answer was coming, and it was bigger than anyone expected. The trial took 8 months to begin, but those 8 months changed everything. The investigation that Congressman Torres demanded revealed things that shocked even the most cynical observers. Officer Kendricks had 43 complaints in his file over 12 years. 43. And not one had resulted in serious discipline. Most were dismissed without investigation. A few led to mandatory training sessions that Kendricks attended and then went right back to his old behavior. But he wasn't alone. The investigation uncovered a culture in the department where complaints were routinely dismissed. where officers with problematic records were protected, where the union made it nearly impossible to fire anyone no matter what they did. Internal affairs had become a joke, a place where complaints went to die. The local newspaper ran a series of articles. "How many warnings does it take?" One headline read, with Kendricks's photo and a list of dismissed complaints scrolling down the page. Another article featured interviews with people who'd filed complaints and given up when nothing happened. "I knew it was pointless," one man said. "They protect their own." Meanwhile, Daniela went back to work at the hospital, trying to maintain some normalcy for her kids. But normal felt impossible now. Tyler was seeing a therapist twice a week for anxiety. He'd started having nightmares about police cars. Amara wouldn't play outside anymore unless both parents were with her. The day that should have been just another Thursday had fractured something in her children that Daniela wasn't sure would ever fully heal. The trial itself was held in federal court, and the courtroom was packed every single day. News cameras lined the courthouse steps. Protesters gathered with signs, "Justice for Daniela" and "End Police Immunity" and "Black Lives Matter." Lawrence Martin was brilliant. He didn't just present what happened to Daniela. He brought in the other 5 families. He showed the pattern. He put experts on the stand who talked about racial profiling and implicit bias. He showed training materials that the department was supposed to use but didn't. He demonstrated that this wasn't about one bad cop having a bad day. This was systemic failure at every level. The defense tried to argue that the officers were just doing their jobs, that they had a description of a suspect, that in a split second officers have to make difficult decisions. Their lawyer painted Kendricks as a dedicated officer who'd made thousands of stops in his career, and this was just one that went wrong. But then Lawrence put Daniela on the stand. She told her story calmly, clearly. She described every moment, the confusion, the fear, the humiliation, and then she described watching her children's faces as she stood there handcuffed. "My son is 8 years old," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes filled with tears. "He used to wave at police officers. After what happened, he has panic attacks when he sees a police car. My daughter won't let me out of her sight. She's terrified that if I leave, I won't come back. These officers didn't just violate my rights that day. They stole my children's sense of safety." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the judge looked affected. The defense attorney tried to cross-examine her, tried to suggest that maybe she'd been driving erratically. Maybe there was something suspicious about her behavior. But Daniela didn't break. She answered every question with the same calm truth. She'd done nothing wrong. She'd followed every instruction. She'd been polite and cooperative, and it hadn't mattered. When Raymond testified, he kept his answers short and factual. He didn't use his rank or position to intimidate anyone. He simply explained how the incident had affected his family and why he'd used his connections to make sure this got the attention it deserved. "I have access to people in power," he said. "Most families don't. Most families file complaints that go nowhere. They don't have generals or congressmen to call. This shouldn't matter. Justice shouldn't depend on who you know. But since it does, I used everything I had to make sure my wife's voice was heard. And now I'm using that platform to make sure everyone's voice gets heard." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the forewoman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The police department was liable for civil rights violations, for failing to properly train and supervise its officers, for maintaining a culture that enabled discrimination. The damages were substantial. Not just for Daniela, but for all the families involved. But more importantly, the judge ordered systemic reforms, mandatory bias training that was actually enforced, body cameras that couldn't be turned off during any interaction with the public, an independent civilian review board with real power to investigate complaints and recommend discipline. And Officer Kendricks was fired, along with 3 supervisors who had dismissed complaints against him over the years. Outside the courthouse, Lawrence held another press conference with Daniela and Raymond beside him. This time, the other families were there too, along with community leaders and activists who'd supported them throughout the process. "Today is about accountability," Lawrence said, "but it's also about hope. Hope that we can do better, hope that change is possible, hope that the next time someone is pulled over, they'll be treated with the dignity and respect every human being deserves." Daniela stepped up to the microphone. She'd been nervous about speaking, but when she looked out at all the people who'd supported them, the words came easily. This was never about getting rich or getting revenge, she said. This was about making sure no other mother has to stand handcuffed while her children cry for her. No other father has to explain to his kids why the people who are supposed to protect them can hurt them instead. Today's verdict says that Black lives do matter, that our dignity matters, that our children's safety matters, and that there will be consequences when those things are violated. The crowd erupted in cheers. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. But all Daniela could think about was getting home to her kids. They'd been staying with Raymond's parents during the trial, shielded from the media circus. She needed to hold them and tell them it was over. That evening, the whole family sat together in the living room. Tyler and Amara were on the couch between their parents, finally relaxing in a way they hadn't in months. "Did you win?" Tyler asked. "We did," Raymond said. "The judge said what those officers did was wrong and they have to change the way they do things. So it won't happen to other kids?" Daniela pulled her son close. "We're going to do everything we can to make sure it doesn't. That's why we fought so hard. Not just for us, but for everyone." Amara, who'd been quiet through most of the conversation, suddenly spoke up. "Mommy, are you still scared of the police?" It was a hard question to answer honestly. "Sometimes," Daniela admitted, "but I'm less scared than I was. Because now I know that people care. I know that we can fight back when things are wrong. And I know that there are good officers out there who want to do the right thing." 3 months after the trial, the police department held its first meeting with the new Civilian Review Board. The community showed up in force, dozens of people ready to hold the department accountable. The new police chief, brought in after the old one retired in the wake of the scandal, stood before them and did something remarkable. He apologized. "What happened to Daniela Brooks and her family was inexcusable," he said. "It represents failures at every level of our department. To her, to the other families affected, and to this entire community, I am truly sorry. We have a long road ahead of us to rebuild trust, but I promise you we're committed to walking that road. It wasn't everything. Apologies don't erase trauma. Reforms on paper don't always mean change on the streets. But it was a start." A year after that terrible Thursday afternoon, Daniela and Raymond created a foundation. They used some of the settlement money to help other families who experienced police misconduct, but didn't have the resources to fight back. They provided legal assistance, therapy for children affected by traumatic police encounters, and advocacy for policy changes in departments across the country. Tyler started sleeping through the night again. He was still wary of police cars, but he was healing. He'd recently written an essay for school about his mother, calling her the bravest person he knew. Amara had started playing outside again, her laughter filling the neighborhood like it used to. One afternoon, Daniela was in the garden when Mrs. Patterson walked over. The elderly neighbor had been one of their fiercest supporters throughout everything. "I'm proud of you," Mrs. Patterson said simply. "What you did, what your family did, it mattered. Real change takes courage." Daniela looked around her neighborhood, the place where she'd been humiliated and broken. But it was also where neighbors had stood up for her, where videos had been filmed that told the truth, where a community had rallied around a family in crisis. "We couldn't have done it alone," Daniela said. "It took all of us." And that was the real lesson in all of this. Change doesn't come from one person, no matter how much power or influence they have. It comes from communities standing together, from people refusing to look away when injustice happens, from ordinary citizens deciding that enough is enough. Raymond came home that evening in his uniform, having just returned from a mission he couldn't talk about. But when he walked through that door and saw his wife cooking dinner, while their children did homework at the kitchen table, when he heard laughter instead of tears, when he felt peace instead of fear, he knew they'd won something more important than any court case. They'd won their lives back, and they'd helped clear the path for others to do the same. That's what justice really looks like. Not perfect, not complete, but real, and worth fighting for.